Hello, and I hope you are happy and doing well, even under lockdown. Um, Welcome to our live stream this evening. Hope, as I say, I hope everything is going well for you. Um, we're looking at a text called The Three Principal Aspects of the Path, which is a short text by Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelugpa tradition, as you know. And we've just started the text. We started looking at it again last week. And we're going to continue this week. Now, before we start, as we usually do, let's take a moment to think about our motivation. As I've told you many times before, that the motivation determines whether the action is positive or negative. And as we want to try to make this as positive as possible, we try to make our motivation as vast as possible. And that means bodhicitta, the wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. So whatever your motivation, I know some people may feel that it's not possible for them to develop bodhicitta, but His Holiness the Dalai Lama says even if you can generate a kind and gentle mind, that is a very good motivation. However, we can go further than that and think about liberation, freedom from all suffering. So whether you're thinking of just developing a kind mind, kind beneficial mind, whether you're thinking of developing liberation for yourself, or if you're thinking of developing liberation so you can be of greatest benefit to all beings, whatever your motivation is, let's think a moment before we start and try to set a very vast motivation, the best motivation we can, so that this live stream can be of very great benefit in our lives, not only this life, but in our future lives as well. So let's just take a moment to think about motivation. So thank you very much. Last week I read out the whole of the text, so I'm not going to do that again this week. If you want to know what the text is, then you can afterwards you can have a look at last week's live stream and find it there. Or if you just Google the three principal aspects of the path, I'm sure you'll find a translation of the text in many places. However, we did start with the beginning few lines, and I'm going to read them out again, and then we'll go from there. So the first kind of verse goes, I bow down to the venerable spiritual masters. I will explain, as well as I am able, the essence of all the teachings of the conqueror, the path praised by the conquerors and their spiritual children, the entrance for the fortunate ones who desire liberation. Last week we talked about spiritual teachers, and I told you that it is very customary in the Buddhist text, particularly in the Tibetan tradition, to start off with a homage. Here, Lama Tsongkhapa is paying homage to all his spiritual masters. And we saw last week what the advantages of paying a homage to the spiritual masters were. We talked about eliminating obstructions to actually composing and practicing the text. We talked about showing humility, not being proud, and avoiding arrogance. We talked about recognizing how the teachings are impermanent. They're not always going to be here. And so they are very valuable while we have them in our environment. We can study them and we can practice them, contemplate and meditate on them, and so gain enlightenment. But they're not always going to be here. So it's the reason that they are here is because there have been many spiritual masters through the past, ever since the Buddhist time, giving these teachings and passing on the information and developing realizations and helping other students to develop realizations so that the teachings can pass down from generation to generation. And that's how they've arrived here. But they are going to die out in due course of time. Even the Buddha himself said the teachings will die out. And then there will be a long period of degeneration, degenerate times in which there will be none of these teachings available. So paying homage to the spiritual masters recognizes the value of the spiritual masters and the value of the teachings that they've given us, and that these teachings that they've given us, although they're not going to be around for in due course, at least we have them now, so we can practice them and improve our minds. Then another recognition when you bow down to the Venerable Spiritual Masters, Lama Tsongkhapa is recognizing that it is very difficult to gain spiritual realizations without a spiritual teacher, without spiritual masters. Of course, we have books, but particularly in Lama Tsongkhapa's time, there weren't many written teachings. It all came down by word of mouth. So for him, it was extremely important to listen to the teachings and to gain realizations through being in the presence of the spiritual masters and taking their teachings. So that's another benefit of listening to these teachings, is that through these teachings we can gain spiritual insights and eventually gain the ultimate insight into the nature of reality and be free of all our sufferings. And then we talked about, at the end of last week's session, we talked about what are the qualities of the spiritual teacher. Now, it's very important to understand what the qualities of the spiritual teacher are, because if we're going to listen to teachers, we really must know that they are qualified to be able to give the teachings. I don't pretend to be qualified. So I'm just passing on what I've read and from the teachings that I've been given, and planting seeds. And it is probably much better if you take these teachings again and again from more qualified people than I am. But I am all you've got at the moment, so we'll just proceed and just take whatever I say, consider very carefully. And if you find some discrepancy or something that you don't agree with or you find troubling, then it's a good idea to make a note of it and to approach more highly realized people than myself and ask them questions for clarification. But anyway, the other reason why it's a very good idea to understand the qualities of teachers is because we are actually trying to develop the mind of a highly qualified teacher. The mind of a highly qualified teacher is highly realized and positive in many, many ways, and is close to enlightenment, or getting close, if not already enlightened, getting closer and closer to enlightenment. And so if we want liberation and enlightenment, then that's the sort of mind that we are looking for. That's the sort of mind we're trying to develop. And so it's very good to know what the qualities of a highly realized teacher or spiritual being is like, because that's actually what we're trying to achieve in our own case as well. I'm not saying that we're trying to become great teachers, but we are trying to develop the qualities of a great teacher's mind. And so knowing what those qualities are is very important. So let's just go through some of the qualities that we should look for in a spiritual teacher and that we should think to develop in our own minds as we go through this text and onwards. Lama Tsongkhapa himself gave quite extensive teaching in his tome, the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment, of what you should look for in a teacher. Because, as I told you last time, in the Tibetan tradition especially, the teacher is regarded even more important than the Buddha, because the Buddha is not here to give us these teachings, but the person who is your spiritual teacher is like the Buddha, because he's giving you the teachings that the Buddha gave to gain enlightenment. So in the Tibetan tradition, the spiritual teacher is the guru, the one that's most important to you. Although you can have many teachings or many teachers in the Tibetan tradition or any spiritual tradition, you can take teachings from many of the teachers, not only in the Buddhist tradition, but other teachers as well, and gain great benefit from them. But the one that is most important to you, the one that you are closest aligned with, that is what they call the guru, and the one that is the one whose mind you are going to get closest to or develop closest to. So it is important to understand what his or her mind is like, so that you know where your mind is also going. So Lama Tsongkhapa, in the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, took as his source Maitreya's Ornament for the Mahayana Sutras, and Geshe Sonam Rinchen, who was a great teacher that I quote sometimes, or a few times through these teachings. I'm going to quote Geshe Sonam Rinchen. He was a great teacher at the Tibetan Library of Works and Archives in Dharamsala, and I took some teachings from him, as I mentioned last time. And he had many students throughout the world and regarded as a very highly realized teacher. He even came out to New Zealand and gave teachings here. He had a very strong connection with the Tibetan center in Whangarei. But he's passed on now. But he's written a number of books, and if you're interested, you can find his books on Amazon or Book Depository or any of the Buddhist sites that sell books. His name is Geshe Sonam Rinchen. And in his translation of, he also wrote a book on the three principal aspects of the path. And in that book, his translation, he says, the spiritual teacher is subdued, calm, very peaceful, with surpassing qualities, persevering, rich in learning, with understanding of suchness, skilled in communication, compassionate, undiscouraged, and steadfast. Now, of course, that's quite a long list of qualities to look for. And you may kind of say, well, what's all that about? And I don't understand all of that. So we'll go through it a little bit. As I say, I have gone through these qualities at the center the last lesson that we had before the shutdown. But we'll just glance through them again just to make sure in our minds what the text is talking about. So subdued means that the teacher is very well controlled in his or her actions of body, speech, and mind. And particularly the subdued person is well controlled by the precepts that they take. In other words, they take precepts and you have the precepts of the monks and nuns, the novice monks and nuns, and the fully ordained monks and nuns. These are all the vows they've taken, the precepts they've promised to follow. And then also in the Mahayana tradition, you have the bodhisattva precepts. And even in the tantric tradition, there are many tantric precepts as well. So what we mean by subdued means that the teacher should act in a way that accords with good conduct, and the good conduct is outlined by all these precepts. And of course, we start with the lower precept, or the fewer precepts, so just the 5 precepts: not to kill, not to steal, not to have sexual misconduct, not to lie, and not to indulge in drugs or alcohol, that sort of thing. So many people take those precepts for life and try to keep those precepts as far as possible. And then when you understand those precepts and you can keep them well, then you can go on to the other precepts and slowly work yourself up through the precepts. And the precepts are calculated to make us more and more well-behaved, compassionate, kindly persons. Mainly people that do not harm ourselves and do not harm others. That's the purpose of the precepts, is to free our mind from harm, free our mind from creating harm in any way whatsoever. So that's what subdued means. And then calm, the teacher's mind and our own mind should become calm as possible. And this is achieved, of course, through concentration, training the mind not to be distracted, to be free of distractions, and to approach every situation with a concentrated and peaceful attitude. And then the next attitude is very peaceful, because very peaceful means that the mind has observed its own tendency to indulge in disturbing emotions that bring turbulence and disturbance to the mind. And through the understanding of the nature of reality, has addressed those disturbing emotions, those negative aspects of our own psyche, the shadow, if you like, and has transformed them so that the mind has become much more peaceful and is not overtaken so much at all by the turbulent emotions that we are normally subject to. Then the phrase "with surpassing qualities" indicates that the teacher should have greater qualities than the student. Of course, if the student has better qualities than the teacher, then the student is not likely to get all that much benefit from the teacher. So the teacher should know more than the student and have better qualities than the student. And in that way, the teacher can teach us. The teacher, through example and through teachings and through the way that they live their lives, can show us how we too should behave, and we too should learn our lives. Then the description "persevering" shows that the teacher should never be tired of explaining the Dharma, of teaching the Dharma and explaining the Dharma in many ways, not only by just sitting and teaching in this kind of situation, but also by what he or she does, teaching the Dharma. And many teachers they're teaching all the time in their lives. Many great teachers will be, whatever they do in their life is calculated to help their students develop on the path to enlightenment. And so it's not just when we talk about persevering, it means that the teacher should always be teaching, ready to teach the Dharma, explaining the Dharma and explaining why they're doing things, how they do things, so that their students can follow in their path. And then rich in learning means that the teacher should know the Buddha's teachings very well, inside and out. Of course, the more the teacher knows, the better the teacher is able to lead the student. And then suchness, with an understanding of suchness, this means that the teacher should know the nature of reality. Suchness means emptiness. It's another word for emptiness, and emptiness is the term that we use to describe the nature of reality. Now, of course, the nature of reality, realization of the nature of reality cannot be described. It is beyond description. It is beyond concept and words and thought. But we have to convey it. The teacher who has an understanding was a realization of emptiness has to be able to convey it in some way. So we use the word emptiness or suchness to try to to give a label at least to the ultimate realization. And so the teacher should have an understanding of suchness or emptiness. The best would be a realization of it, that the teacher has a complete experiential realization of it. But that is extremely difficult. And so even if your teacher is able to describe it in some way through a concept or through some kind of supposition, some kind of mental image, then that's also very useful. So Geshe Sonam Rinchen says the understanding of suchness could be through any of these ways, through having a mental image or through intellectual understanding, or best of all, through experiential understanding. And then, of course, a good teacher has to be skilled in communication. That means skilled in passing on their knowledge. There was a teacher in the monastery where I stayed, and as I've said before, for example, he had a very good heart, and he knew quite a lot, but he didn't have the ability to communicate very well. He was very direct in his communication, very kind of gruff and direct, and he was not the sort of person that gathered around disciples around him. But he was golden-hearted. He was so kind, but his approach was so direct and kind of almost rough that he didn't do very much teaching at all. I remember also one teacher when I was studying at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives. I was studying Tibetan there, and they have a Tibetan class there every day, and I was attending, trying to learn Tibetan. There was a very good monk who'd obviously taught many Westerners before, and he started off the teachings, and we were going along quite nicely. And then he was invited to go to Switzerland and visit some of his students there. And he passed on our classes to other teachers. And one of the other teachers that came there was a Tibetan nun. She was a Tibetan who spoke some English, and she took over the job of teaching us Tibetan language. But her attitude was, she'd obviously been teaching young Tibetans, children. And the way that they teach in Tibetan tradition is that the children learn by rote. Whatever the teacher tells them, when they're young, they learn by rote. They don't need to understand anything, but they just learn by rote. And so they're not expected to answer questions. They just listen to what the teacher says and then repeat what the teacher says. And it's although, of course, Westerners balk at that kind of thing, what they were actually doing was, when they were young, they were first taught language, and then they were taught, as they grew up, they were taught the texts, and they were taught just to learn the text by rote. So many of the young monks just learned text by rote. They didn't have to understand a word. They just learned to put the text in their mind. And then when they became teenagers or young people, they would get teachings on the text. And then, because they already had the text in their mind, they were able to relate what the teachings were immediately to what was going on in their mind. They didn't need any books or anything like that. They already had it in their mind, so that they could relate to what they were hearing straight away, and in that way, quite quickly gain understanding. But this Tibetan nun that came to teach us Tibetan, she had the same attitude. Don't ask me questions. Somebody asked her a question. She said, don't ask questions. You just follow what I say. You just do what I say. And you don't ask questions. Now you can imagine grown-up Westerners, and most of the students were grown-up Westerners taking this Tibetan language class, what effect that had. In about 2 lessons, she emptied that class completely. Westerners, of course, like to understand. They don't like to just learn by rote, learn off the top of their heads. We have a very different kind of education system where we emphasize understanding. And so when she said, don't ask me questions, you don't need to understand, you just learn by rote, she emptied the class very quickly. So this is a kind of, when we're talking about skill in communication, we first have to know, a teacher first has to get to know his students and how his or her students' minds work before they march into class and start telling them this and that. Because if they're not very skilled in communication, then of course the students are put off, and that halts the whole process completely. So then the next quality is to be compassionate. And this mainly means that the teacher is not teaching for wealth or for fame or for anything like that, but out of compassion for seeing how the students are ignorant and they are there to learn, and the teacher wishes to help them to overcome their negativity and their suffering. And so the teacher is there out of compassion to be of benefit to the students. So the main impetus for the teacher to be actually teaching is this compassion for the students. Of course, some teachers take advantage of this, and they do ask for lots of money, and they become very famous. Maybe they're looking for fame. From a Buddhist point of view, that is actually some kind of pollution in the teacher's mind. And we should try to, when you find a teacher that's mainly interested in gaining money or gaining some kind of personal advantage out of teaching, we should be very careful about that type of teacher. I've heard of one teacher in the West who came to one of the countries in the West, Australia or America, I think. Anyway, his main concern was to help the people in his village. So every teaching he went to, he would hammer the students about giving donations so that he could relieve the suffering in his village, or to help the people in his village in Tibet or in India. I can't remember. It was quite a long time ago. But the students became quite disillusioned with this continuing asking for some kind of resource for this teacher, giving teachings and asking all the time for resources for his family or for his village and so on. And eventually he had to return because the students no longer had faith in him. So that's what happens if you are a spiritual teacher and then you ask for money or some kind of benefit for yourself, then eventually your students become disillusioned. And so when we examine our own minds in following the spiritual path, it's very good to look deeply into our minds and see whether we are following the spiritual path for some kind of personal benefit as well. Because even if we become very learned and even realized and skillful, but we become a teacher, but we approach our teaching with this in the back of our minds, that we want some kind of personal benefit out of this, then that is polluting. That is really polluting the teachings and polluting our transmission of the teachings. and it's not going to end up very well. So we're learning the teachings to be of, not to be of benefit to just to ourselves alone. We're learning the teachings so that we can eventually be of greatest benefit to others. That's the main motivation. And seeing how others are suffering, recognizing their suffering through our own suffering, we try to develop the compassionate mind that becomes the positive motivation for becoming a great teacher. Even if we're not going to become a great teacher, we're still going to be of great influence to others the further we go along the spiritual path. So we need to have compassion to be able to help others, even if we don't want to become a great teacher, we don't want to teach. Just our presence in the way that we're going to live our life is going to be teaching for others. And so we need to develop compassion as a motivation for whatever we do. It's very important to develop this compassion and to try to free ourselves from the ego grasping that always looks for personal benefit in what we're doing. So that's compassion. And then the description says undiscouraged and steadfast. So this means that the teacher should not be discouraged by terrible students. Now, of course, every class in the teachers that a teacher gives has many types of students in it. Some students will be very good students, very studious, and so on. Other students will be kind of medium students. They study a bit, but they're not all there. And then there might be other students that come along that have some kind of mental block or something going on that stops them from being a very good student. And often Buddhism attracts people with some kind of mental difficulty. When it says that the teacher should be undiscouraged and steadfast, it means that the teacher should never be discouraged by the difficulties that he or she encounters in the teaching process. Never mind if they are bad students, if they're students who maybe don't understand very well, they don't have very great intelligence, and they need explanation again and again and again and again. The teacher is never discouraged by that sort of thing. And even if there's a badly behaved student who the teacher sees can still benefit from the teachings, the teacher develops some kind of way of getting through to that student and continuing to teach that student, even if the student is not all that well behaved. So this is what it means to be undiscouraged and steadfast. The teacher is never tired of giving teachings. He's never discouraged by the students or never tired of giving the teachings. Is always ready to help the students, to give teachings to the students, and to help them in whichever way he or she deems possible. So those are the qualities that we try to look for in a teacher, and those are the qualities that we try to develop in our own minds. And when you're thinking about getting a teacher, a guru, one that you can develop a strong connection with, you might think, well, this is very difficult. Having all these qualities, how am I going to find anybody with all these qualities? And it's very true that there are not all that many teachers around that have all these qualities. So in the beginning, as beginners, we can, although we keep in mind all these qualities, that these are the qualities that we need to look for in an authentic teacher, we can take teachings from from other teachers or develop connection with other teachers that don't have such high qualities. And Geshe Sonam Rinchen says, at least your teacher should have, you should realize that your teacher has the knowledge that you're looking for, the knowledge to lead you on the path to enlightenment. That's one of the things you should be really sure of if you're going to get a teacher. Even though they may not have all the qualities we've talked about, at least be sure that they have the knowledge that you're looking for, and actually that they're trustworthy, that they're not going to take advantage of you. They may have the knowledge, and as you know, there are stories of teachers who've come to the West from the East, and then in due course they've taken advantage of their students or abused their students in some way. And before we take a teacher, we must at least have some certainty that they're trustworthy, that they are not going to abuse us or not going to harm us in any way, and that you feel that you're safe enough to enter into a good relationship with this teacher. Then another quality to look for, even if you can't find all the other the qualities we've just gone through, is that this teacher should be more spiritual than secular. They should be more interested in spiritual matters than secular matters. And because you want to be more interested, you want somebody that's more interested in spiritual things, because this is the path you want to follow. And so the teacher should be also more interested in spiritual things, and he or she should also be more interested in future lives than in this life. If the teacher is only trying to build up some kind of riches or wealth or status in this life, and you see they're not actually very much interested in coming lives, then it's probably a good idea to say, maybe this is not the person that I want to follow, even though they may be very charismatic and have many other students. And then the other quality is that they must be more concerned with helping the student, as I said, more concerned with helping the student than gaining anything for themselves. That is really a very important quality. One of the most important, that you look into the teacher and see that the teacher is wanting to help the students more than gaining any kind of comeback for themselves, like status or wealth or cars and so on and so forth. So then, those are the qualities of the teacher. So if you're going to look for a teacher, and these are the kind of teachers that Lama Tsongkhapa was talking about when he paid homage to his spiritual masters, he's talking about the spiritual masters that have these types of qualities. But then it's not only on the side of the teacher. There is also the side of the student. And if we want to be good students, if we want to be students that a teacher can have confidence in, and that a teacher wants to help, we must also develop certain qualities within ourselves, or make sure that we aspire to these qualities and work to gain these qualities, and not just be kind of going to the teachings because it's nice to be in this kind of environment and to show off our learning or something like that. So in the yogic deeds of the bodhisattvas, Aryadeva says that students should be unprejudiced, intelligent, and interested. So unprejudiced, open-minded, and unprejudiced. This means that we're not, if we unprejudiced, it means that we are not just sticking to our own view, our own culture, our own way of doing things, that we're open-minded to what the teacher is telling us, because very often what the teachers will be telling us will be contrary to our cultural teachings, what society tells us, and all that sort of thing. If we're prejudiced and say, my culture is the best, and I know how to live life, and we have some kind of bias, then it's going to be difficult to develop a relationship with a very highly realized teacher, because a highly realized teacher is not caught up in things like culture and society values and all that sort of thing. A highly realized teacher has moved way beyond that. So the teachings that a highly realized teacher will give will be beyond cultural values and so on. So we have to develop our minds to be open-minded and unprejudiced. From our side, we must be open-minded and unprejudiced, and be willing to examine whatever the teacher teaches us from a more objective point of view, rather than from a cultural point of view. Then intelligent means that we need to use our intelligence to see whether the teachings that we're getting from the teacher are relevant to us or not, what meaning they have for us, and how we can use them, how we can apply them. We need some kind of intelligence to be able to see that these teachings have relevance to us and that we can practice them. And we also need some kind of intelligence to be able to understand them, and when we don't understand, to be able to ask questions and ask intelligent questions about what we don't understand, and know how to approach the teacher, know how to approach our fellow students, so that we can get the greatest understanding out of the teaching. So we need some kind of intelligence to do this. And then when Aryadeva says we should also what does he say? They should be enthusiastic and persevering. That's right. Enthusiastic and persevering. That means that the student must want to learn, must want to continue coming to the teachings again and again, and to study and to contemplate what the teachings are, and then eventually to meditate on the teachings. Of course, you can be very intelligent, you can be unbiased, but if you don't have a nature that perseveres, you might flit from one teacher to another, go from, you might be intelligent. Let's take an example. You might be intelligent and unprejudiced. So you go to a Buddhist master and you listen to the Buddhist master for a while. But if you're not going to persevere with the teachings, you then think, yes, this is very well, but now I'll go to a Hindu master and learn what they say. So you go to a Hindu master and you get all their intellectual knowledge of Hinduism, or then you go to a Christian master or an Islam master or whatever, and so you get all the intellectual knowledge and you know all about it, but actually you don't know anything experiential, because you're not persevering. You haven't gone through the teachings and practiced the teachings. You haven't persevered with the practice and made the teachings your own. You just had the teachings rattling around in your head. So if you're not enthusiastic and persevering, then there's a danger that you will give up at some stage. It'll become too hard, or you'll just be a spiritual materialist going from one thing to another. You might find it too difficult, something like that, and then you just give up, and then the teachings are not of a very great value towards you, for you. So those are the qualities that a student needs to have. So we need to look into our minds and see if we have those qualities. and some kind of intelligence, and make our minds open-minded and without prejudice, and then also to develop perseverance and strong interest. Now, excuse me, please, I'm going to sneeze. Of course, when I said that, it didn't come. So, just to go back to just to summarize all that, what the spiritual teacher is leading us to is not just an intellectual understanding of the teachings. The spiritual teacher is leading us to an experiential understanding of the teachings, and that is most important. It's not only good enough to have an intellectual knowledge of the teachings. We need to gain realizations. We need experiential understanding. That means having a real experience of the teachings. It's tempting when we go through teachings like this to learn them and to have a great knowledge of them. But if all the teachings are doing is rattling around in our head, it makes no change to our life. And the whole Buddhist teaching, the whole of the Buddhist teaching is calculated to realization, to making changes to our life, making changes to our mind. That's what Buddhism is about, is to making changes to our mind. And if we're not going to have experiential understanding, we're not going to make changes. It's like, I'll tell you not to lie, for instance. A teacher tells you not to lie. But if you have a habit of lying, even though it's not, the teacher tells you this is a wrong thing to do, and so you should not lie, and you know you should not lie, and you don't want to lie, but still you find that because your mind is so habituated to lying, then you continue to lie, even though you don't want to, because you know it's in your head that you shouldn't lie, but you're not making any attempt to stop lying. You think, this lying is not a good thing, but this is my habit, so I just continue with my habit. And we have that kind of attitude towards the teachings, then it's not going to help us. So the spiritual teacher is teaching us the teachings and how to practice the teachings, so that we eventually land up with an experiential understanding, so that our whole life changes, our whole life is transformed. So just to take an example, Lama Tsongkhapa, his teacher was a deity called Manjushri. In the Tibetan tradition, Manjushri is the deity of wisdom. So Lama Tsongkhapa used to have visions of Manjushri, total, like real vivid visions, like as if Manjushri was right there in front of him. This particular meditational deity. His meditation was so strong and his mind was so clear that he was able to see Manjushri and to take teachings from Manjushri. And those teachings, he followed those teachings so closely that they became experiential for him. Of course, he purified his mind to such an extent by the time that he could see this vision of Manjushri, that already his mind was in a very highly realized state. But he was able to gain such experiential understanding that he once wrote, many who have heard the treatises extensively, who also strenuously employed many lines of reasoning, and whose qualities of insight were not inferior, despite their efforts, failed to understand that which I have seen well through the kindness of my teacher Manjughosha. Manjughosha is another name for Manjushri, which with great affection I shall explain. This is when he, in one of his texts, he was writing that he was going to explain a teaching. And this indicates to us that although we may attend many teachings and gain a whole lot of knowledge and many lines of reasoning, many ways of reasoning to convince ourselves and others that what we're saying is the truth. And if we just follow the teachings, and even if we develop some qualities of insight, some higher qualities of insight, if we don't put the teachings into real practice and develop real experiential understanding of what the teachings are about, we cannot get the high realizations that will ensure that we become enlightened beings, Buddhas and so on. So this is what our minds, if we look at the moment, if we look at our mind, we see that our mind is very, well, if I look at my mind, I cannot say anything about your mind, but if I look at my mind, I see all sorts of strange and weird monsters there, and all sorts of strange things, negativities, obstructions and obscurations and obstacles in my mind that prevent me from seeing anything resembling a meditational deity or even approaching a meditational deity. So, and the reason for that, Geshe Sonam Rinchen says, when we look into our mind and we have such, we can't see these things, we can't realize very easily what the teachings are about, then it's a sign that we have negativity on our mind. We have negative karma that is creating obstructions and obstacles in our mind. And our mind is muddy through our karma and through our afflictive emotions. And these are causing obstacles to us being like Lama Tsongkhapa and other great masters. And so we have the teachings. Many of the teachings are on how to free our minds from the obscurations and the obstructions and the negative karma and the negative habits and the negative instincts that we have, how to free our minds from that. And if we follow the teachings and we practice wholeheartedly, then we can free our minds from these things. If we start the teachings from the beginning and then start purifying our minds, eventually we can come to a point where our minds are free from all these afflictive emotions, the negative karma, and so on, that keep our mind muddied and prevent us from getting high realizations. Eventually we can get high realizations, just like Lama Tsongkhapa. The Buddha himself said that none of us cannot, there's not one of us that cannot become a Buddha. Every one of us has the potential to become a Buddha. And so if we find valid spiritual masters and we follow what they say and we are good students, we embrace the teachings and we follow them as much as we possibly can, and we try to, as much as we possibly can, we try to free ourselves from the negativities that are preventing us from the great realizations. Then there's no reason why we cannot also become highly realized beings. And that's our aim, isn't it? That by listening to the teachings like these teachings here, and by thinking about them and understanding them, and perhaps studying them and contemplating them and then meditating on them, that's actually what we want. We want to be free. We want to realize renunciation and bodhicitta and the ultimate view, so that we can be free and we can help others be free. That's kind of where we're going with this. And so it is kind of behoven on us to look for spiritual masters or spiritual teachers that can take us along the path to enlightenment. And we should also try to act as much as possible in ways that make us good students, keep our minds open-minded, and wherever we see bias And of course, we have bias. It's definite that we have bias. We're conditioned, this whole life conditions us to have bias. And wherever we see bias arising, to try and free ourselves from that bias, find ways to think about that bias that is going to nullify it, that's going to free our minds from it, and to develop the intelligence to look at the teachings that we get and to make those teachings our own. It's not beneficial to just have teachings rattling around our heads that we think are these teachings are very wonderful because they were taught by these high teachers. But if we don't have a kind of relation or a connection to those teachings through our intelligence, if we don't use our intelligence to develop a connection to those teachings, then it's not much benefit having those teachings in our head, even though we may think they're wonderful and great and all that sort of thing. But there's some kind of connection missing through not examining them intelligently. Then it's not beneficial for us. And of course, to examine them intelligently, we need to be persevering, and we need to be steadfast and persevering, and not to give up when things start appearing to be difficult, which is very easy to do, which is what we do very often. We find it too hard, and then we give up and say, it's too difficult. I can't go any further. That in Buddhism, that's called a kind of laziness. When we say, I'm not good enough. So we are definitely good enough. There's no doubt about it that each and every one of us is good enough. We know when we talk about progress along the spiritual path, it's not that we all progress at the same pace. We're all starting from a different point of view. We're all starting from a different starting place. And we need to start from the starting place where we are. And then use our teachers and our intelligence and so on from where we are, and then progress at a pace that is comfortable for us, that is not too difficult for us. And to go from not to try to take huge, large steps when our capacity is only for small steps, baby steps. So we take baby steps in the beginning, and baby steps is fine. Even baby steps that go two forwards and one backwards is fine. In the beginning, we take baby steps, and then slowly, as a baby learns to walk and get more stable and more steady, and eventually can walk properly, and then eventually can take a few steps of running, and eventually learns how to run, and then eventually can run and walk and even ride bicycles and do all sorts of things, climb onto playgrounds and all that sort of thing with great ease. That's how we should approach the teachings, that we take with care. We start from where we are. We don't compare ourselves to others and think, I should go as fast as so-and-so because they're learning so quickly and getting so much realization. We just go in our own pace, not comparing ourselves with others, and slowly making progress in our own way. It is a great mistake to compare ourselves and to say, I should be, so and so is doing so well, and I'm so slow, or I'm so backward. This doesn't help at all. So we're not encouraged to compare, but to just take our time and practice steadily from day to day. Practice with perseverance. Go to the teachings, understand the teachings, make the teachings our own as much as we can from day to day, from week to week, from month to month, from year to year. And that's the way that we will slowly develop qualities and become excellent students for excellent teachers. So we've come to the end of our hour. I hope, as usual, I hope it's been of some benefit to you. I hope you get some kind of inspiration, some kind of understanding. So just think about it and make it as, if this is of benefit to you, then try to make it some part of your life, some part of your understanding, some part of the way that you conduct yourself. And slowly, slowly, we progress. Before we go, let's just make dedication, as we usually do. Please dedicate to your motive, whatever your purpose was. Dedicate whatever we've talked about and whatever benefit you've got, even if it's the slightest benefit, even if only one word is of benefit to you in this hour, then that is good enough. Dedicate that one word of benefit to your motivation. It is said that if you make a proper dedication, then whatever benefit you got from that particular action cannot be destroyed by negative emotions like anger and wrong views and so on. So let's try to make a very strong dedication, particularly if you can, please dedicate to gaining enlightenment so we can all be of greatest benefit, not only to ourselves, but to all beings everywhere. Thank you very much for being with us, and I hope you can join us again next Tuesday. If I'm still alive and healthy, I will definitely be here, and I hope that you will have an opportunity to join us again. Thanks very much. Bye.